There's a specific moment when everything shifts. A moment so quiet you might miss it entirely if you're not paying attention. It's the moment you stop. You stop chasing. You stop explaining. You stop reaching into the void, hoping this time someone will finally reach back. And in that silence, something unexpected happens. The person who pushed you away starts to genuinely lose their mind. Not because you suddenly became more lovable, but because you finally stopped playing the only game they knew how to win. If you've ever wondered why an avoidant person seems to escalate their pursuit the moment you finally give up pursuing them, this is exactly why. The entire dynamic was built on a twisted game with very specific rules, and as long as you played by those rules, as long as you remained the one reaching and they remained the one pulling away, everything stayed exactly as their nervous system needed it to be: comfortable, predictable, safe. Your silence didn't just upset that balance, it destroyed it entirely. Let's talk about what game was actually being played, because understanding the specific mechanics of it is what finally allows you to stop playing. An avoidant person in a relationship dynamic with someone who loves them has access to something they desperately want, but are terrified to fully claim: connection. But they want it on their own terms: controlled, deniable, safe. So they set up a specific pattern, often entirely unconsciously, that allows them to have their cake and eat it too. They retreat just enough to trigger pursuit. They offer just enough warmth to keep hope alive. They create inconsistency that's confusing enough that you keep trying to understand it, keep trying to decode the mystery of their behavior, which means you stay engaged, you stay trying, you stay available. This isn't necessarily calculated or cruel in intent. It's simply what an avoidant nervous system does when faced with genuine closeness. It creates distance, but it does so in a way that doesn't quite eliminate the connection entirely. The result is a relationship that feels like you're constantly chasing someone who's constantly running, but never far enough away that you actually lose them completely. They need you to keep reaching, because your reaching is what proves they're wanted, while simultaneously confirming they're not trapped, not consumed, not swallowed by your need. As long as this game continues, as long as you're the one doing the emotional labor of maintaining connection, they get everything they want. They get to feel pursued without ever having to fully commit. They get to feel wanted without the vulnerability of saying so directly. They get to exercise control over the relationship's emotional temperature by deciding when to warm and when to freeze. And you, meanwhile, get to experience the exhausting futility of trying to win someone's consistent presence when winning was never actually the goal, at least not the goal from their perspective. But here's what happens when you stop playing. When you finally, quietly, without announcement or drama, simply stop reaching. When you take all that energy you were pouring into decoding their mixed signals, into planning how to get them to notice you, into organizing your emotional life around their inconsistency, and you redirect it entirely into your own survival, your own healing, your own forward movement, the game changes completely. Suddenly, the person who controlled the distance can no longer control it from their side. The dynamic was always built on your participation. If you're not pursuing, they can't run. If you're not chasing, they can't feel pursued. If you're not available, they can't choose distance while keeping you on the hook. Your silence removes the entire game board. And for someone whose nervous system has become dependent on that specific rhythm, that specific dynamic, the removal of the game feels catastrophic. This is why you often see avoidant people escalate their behavior specifically at the moment when you finally stop. This is why someone who ignored you for weeks suddenly can't stop texting. This is why someone who created all this distance suddenly starts showing up, paying attention, trying desperately to regain the access they'd taken for granted. It's not because they suddenly realized how wrong they were and had a change of heart. It's because their game stopped working. And the absence of the game is more destabilizing to their nervous system than any amount of conflict ever could be. Let's talk about what your silence actually communicates, because this is crucial to understand. Your silence doesn't communicate anger, though they might interpret it that way. Your silence doesn't communicate rejection or punishment, though some might read it as such. Your silence communicates something far more terrifying to an avoidant mind: actual indifference, actual moving on, actual acceptance that the dynamic will never be different. It communicates that you're no longer available for the game, that you've left the table entirely. This is radically different from all the things you might have said, all the times you might have expressed your hurt or confusion or frustration. Words can be argued with, words can be reinterpreted, words can be met with defensiveness or dismissal or promises to change that never materialize. But silence? Silence is irrefutable. Silence cannot be argued away or minimized or explained as misunderstanding. Your silence is action speaking louder than words ever could. And that action says, I'm no longer waiting. For an avoidant person whose entire relational pattern has been built around controlling distance while keeping someone emotionally tethered, your silence represents a genuine loss of control. They can't pull you closer because you're no longer within arm's reach. They can't maintain distance while keeping you on the hook because there's no hook anymore. They can't exercise the push-pull dynamic they've perfected because you've removed yourself from the push-pull entirely. That loss of control is genuinely terrifying to someone for whom control was always the only thing making closeness feel survivable. What often happens next is one of a few possible scenarios, and understanding which direction someone goes tells you something important about their actual capacity for change. Some avoidant people, faced with this loss of control, will finally attempt to get close in ways they never did before. They might reach out directly. They might express feelings they've always hidden. They might make promises about being different. They might do everything they suddenly seem capable of doing now that you're no longer available. Others will double down on the avoidance, disappear more completely, or even seek action elsewhere as a way of proving to themselves that your departure doesn't matter, that they're fine without you, that they never needed what you were offering anyway. This reaction, while painful, is also informative. It tells you that the person's fear was stronger than their capacity to change, even when faced with genuine loss. It tells you that they chose their defense mechanisms over the possibility of actual connection with you. And some will cycle through both, attempting to get close, then retreating in panic when closeness starts to feel real again, creating a new pattern where they're trying to get you back while still running from the very closeness they're requesting. This cycling can be the most confusing response, because it can feel like there's genuine change happening, only to watch it collapse under the weight of their fear. But here's what's crucial to understand. None of these responses change what your silence accomplished. You removed yourself from the game. You stopped playing by rules designed to keep you perpetually reaching. Whether they respond by trying to get you back, by disappearing entirely, or by cycling between the two, the game itself is over. They can't play with one person. The dance requires two, and you've stepped off the dance floor. The reason this matters so deeply is that your silence forces something an avoidant person usually spends their entire life avoiding: being alone with their own feelings. As long as you were reaching, as long as you were available for them to reject or pull close at their discretion, they never had to sit in the discomfort of their own emotional state. Your pursuit gave them something to react to, something to define themselves against. Your consistency, even when it was rejection of your reaching, gave them a role to play. Without you in that dynamic, they're left with themselves. And that's often the one thing an avoidant person has structured their entire life to avoid. This is genuinely painful for them, which is part of why they often escalate their attempts to get you back. They're not necessarily seeking genuine connection. They're seeking relief from the discomfort of their own internal state. They're seeking a return of the game that at least made them feel something, even if that something was uncomfortable. The absence of you, the absence of the dynamic, leaves them facing the very thing their entire defense system was built to protect them from. their own vulnerable, needy human self. Some people find a way to sit with that discomfort and eventually use it as a pathway toward genuine growth and change. They feel the emptiness that your departure created and finally start doing real internal work. Finally start examining why they push away the very thing they want. Finally start building capacity for real vulnerability rather than controlled distance. If that happens, if they genuinely do the work, the relationship might eventually have a chance to be different. Not guaranteed, but possible. But many don't make it to that point. Many cycle through the escalation, the reaching out, the temporary warmth, and then right back into the familiar patterns of withdrawal when things get too real. They reach for you not because they've changed, but because the absence of you is worse than the dance with you. And then, once they've convinced you to start reaching again, once they've got you available again, the game resumes with renewed intensity. Because now they also have the fear of losing you again, driving their need to control things more tightly. This is why your silence is so powerful, and why it's also so crucial that you understand what it actually means. Your silence is powerful not because it's a manipulation tactic, though some might use it that way. It's powerful because it's honest. It communicates the truth of your own limits, your own capacity, your own decision to stop reaching for someone who isn't reaching back. It's powerful because it's the only thing they can't argue with, or control, or minimize. Let's talk about what you might experience after you've gone silent, because the aftermath of silence can be nearly as confusing as the reaching ever was. You might feel guilt watching them struggle with the absence of you, watching them reach out desperately, and feeling like maybe you should respond. Maybe you should at least explain why you've stopped. You might feel doubt, wondering if you made a mistake, if you gave up too soon, if maybe they really do care and are just struggling to show it. You might feel fear that you've created permanent damage, that by stepping away, you've ensured the relationship will never be salvageable. All of these feelings are normal, and all of them deserve compassionate attention rather than judgment. But here's what's important to know. Your silence wasn't an ultimatum. It wasn't a test. It wasn't manipulation. It was simply you deciding that you could no longer afford the emotional cost of a one-sided dynamic. That's not cruelty. That's self-protection. And self-protection is not only acceptable, it's necessary. The guilt you feel might be telling you that you've betrayed your capacity for love and compassion, but what it's actually doing is trying to pull you back into a dynamic that was costing you your peace. The doubt you feel might be telling you that you're too harsh or too quick to give up, but what it's actually doing is offering you a familiar story, one where it's your job to be infinitely patient, infinitely understanding, infinitely available. The fear you feel might be telling you that you've destroyed something precious, but what it's actually doing is revealing how much of yourself you'd already invested in maintaining a connection that was draining you. What your silence actually accomplished was far simpler and far more important than any of these complicated feelings. It accomplished your own survival. It accomplished your own movement forward. It accomplished a clear boundary between what you're willing to accept and what you're not. That boundary is the actual foundation for any possibility of genuine connection, whether with this person or anyone else. Let's talk about what happens if this person does eventually reach back in a genuine way, if they do eventually choose vulnerability over control, if they do eventually try to build something real and consistent rather than playing the push-pull game. What does that look like? And how is it different from the dramatic attempts at reconnection that usually happen when someone first realizes you're gone? Genuine change tends to be quieter than the initial escalation. It doesn't announce itself dramatically. It shows up as consistency over time, as willingness to communicate directly rather than through mixed signals, as capacity to stay present even when presence feels uncomfortable. It shows up as someone finally being willing to examine their own fear rather than acting it out through distance. It shows up as small, repeated choices to stay close when the old pattern would have been to pull away. But here's the crucial part. Whether genuine change happens or not, Whether this person ever does the work to build actual capacity for intimacy or not, your silence has already accomplished what it needed to accomplish. You've removed yourself from a dynamic that wasn't serving you. You established that your peace matters more than your pursuit. You've created space for your own healing, regardless of whether they ever figure out how to heal themselves. The twisted game can only continue if you agree to play. Your silence is your declaration that you're no longer a player in that game. And that declaration is the most powerful thing you could possibly communicate to someone whose entire defense system was built on maintaining that specific dynamic. Whether they recognize that power, whether they respect it, whether they eventually change because of it, none of that actually changes what your silence means about you. You are someone who finally valued yourself enough to stop. That value doesn't depend on anyone else's response to your stopping. It's already complete. But let's dig deeper into something worth understanding about what happens in your own nervous system when you finally go silent. Because that internal shift is just as important as the external effect your silence has on them. For so long, your nervous system has been running on a specific frequency, primed for rejection, tuned to detect the smallest changes in their availability, organized entirely around maintaining connection to someone who was actively working to maintain distance. That hypervigilance has become your baseline. You've organized your entire nervous system around staying alert to their moods, their patterns, their withdrawal and return cycles. When you finally step back, when you finally stop, your own nervous system takes time to recalibrate. You might find yourself still checking for messages out of habit, still noticing when they might have posted something, still tuned to detect any signal they might be sending. This isn't weakness or failure. It's simply the lag between your conscious decision to stop and your nervous system's gradual understanding that the thing it's been waiting for is no longer happening. This recalibration period deserves patience with yourself. You might also notice something unexpected: relief. Beneath the guilt and the doubt and the fear, there's often a deep sense of relief at finally not having to maintain that constant state of vigilance. Relief at not having to decode their behavior anymore. Relief at not having to guess what you did wrong or what you could do differently. This relief is important to acknowledge because it's telling you something crucial. That dynamic was costing you something real, something precious, your own peace. Let's also talk about what it means that they escalate when you go silent, because this pattern tells you something important about the nature of their feelings and the nature of their capacity. If someone genuinely loves you from a secure, grounded place, your silence would probably feel genuinely sad to them, but they would also recognize it as healthy, as necessary, as something you had every right to do. They might miss you, they might feel loss, but they would also respect your choice and give you space to heal. An avoidant person, by contrast, often experiences your silence as a crisis, precisely because the game is what they know how to play. Genuine love without the game, actual vulnerability without the push-pull dynamic, direct connection without the control, these things are often more terrifying to an avoidant person than losing you entirely. So they reach out frantically, not because they've suddenly become capable of the thing they were avoiding, but because they've lost the thing that was allowing them to avoid it. They reach out to restore the game, not to change the game. This is why understanding the difference between genuine reconnection attempts and game restoration attempts is so crucial. A genuine reconnection attempt involves actual vulnerability, actual admission of fear, actual willingness to examine patterns. A game restoration attempt involves desperate reaching, offers of things that don't actually address the core issue, performances of change without any real internal work. Here's another thing worth knowing. Their escalation, while it might feel like victory, is not actually victory. It's not proof that you finally won their love or finally made them understand what they were missing. It's simply proof that your absence is more destabilizing to their nervous system than your reaching ever was. That's important because if you interpret their escalation as victory, if you interpret their panic as proof of love, you might find yourself back in the game without ever addressing what actually needs to change. Your silence was meant to be the beginning of your own healing, not the beginning of a new cycle of hope that this time things will be different. Your silence was meant to be a boundary that says you're no longer available for dysfunction. Whether they respond by genuinely changing or by simply reaching out harder in an attempt to restore the old dynamic, your silence still means exactly what it meant on the first day you went quiet. You're no longer playing. Let's also acknowledge that maintaining your silence isn't always easy, especially when someone is reaching out, trying to get you back, offering words you might have desperately wanted to hear months or years ago. Maintaining your silence requires you to stay grounded in what you learned from the reaching, what you discovered about the dynamic, what you experienced about your own capacity to heal when you stopped trying to maintain a connection that wasn't sustaining you. This is where self-compassion becomes crucial. You will probably want to break your silence at some point. You will probably feel the pull to just check in, just explain your side, just see if maybe this time things could be different. These impulses are completely human, and if you give in to them occasionally, that doesn't erase the work you've already done. But maintaining your silence, even when it's hard, even when you miss them, even when you wonder if you made a mistake, that's what eventually allows your nervous system to fully recalibrate, to stop waiting, to finally accept that this particular connection isn't going to offer you what you need. The twisted game only works if you believe you can win it. Your silence is your declaration that you no longer believe in the game, no longer believe in the possibility of winning through persistence, no longer believe that understanding them more deeply will somehow make them capable of showing up. That declaration is the most powerful thing you could possibly offer yourself, and it's the one thing their behavior can never take away from you. Whether they respond to your silence by finally doing real work, by disappearing entirely, or by cycling through various attempts to get you back, the outcome for you remains the same. You've saved yourself. You've honored your own limits. You've chosen your own peace over someone else's comfort. That's not selfish. That's survival. And survival is always worth celebrating, even when it's quiet, even when it's lonely, even when it cost you something that once felt precious. Your silence didn't ruin their game because you were trying to ruin it. It ruined their game because you finally valued yourself more than you valued playing. And that's something no amount of their reaching or their promises or their temporary vulnerability can ever change about what you've accomplished. Let's talk about something practical that might help you maintain your silence during the harder moments. Understanding that their escalation is not actually progress, not actually evidence that they've finally seen how wrong they were, can help you stay grounded when the reaching feels overwhelming. Their escalation is their nervous system in crisis mode. It's not a breakthrough, it's a breakdown. And while you can feel compassion for that breakdown, compassion doesn't require you to rescue them from it by resuming the game. The real power of your silence lies in what it teaches you about yourself. It teaches you that you can survive without their acknowledgement. It teaches you that you can be okay, even when they're not okay. It teaches you that your peace doesn't actually depend on their understanding, or their change, or their eventual realization of what they lost. Those are monumental lessons, and they're worth far more than any reconciliation could offer you. If you're currently in the early stages of your silence, if you're still fighting the urge to reach out, to explain yourself, to respond to their attempts at reconnection, know that this gets easier. Not because you stop caring, but because your nervous system gradually accepts that the waiting is over. Not because you stop missing them, but because you gradually accept that missing someone and being in relationship with them are two very different things. Not because the pain goes away entirely, but because the pain stops being accompanied by the constant hope that things might change. And paradoxically, that loss of hope is exactly what eventually allows you to actually begin healing from this. The real measure of what your silence accomplished isn't whether they come back, or whether they change, or whether they finally understand what they lost. The real measure is what it gave you back: yourself, your peace, your future, your ability to trust yourself again. Those are victories that don't require anyone else's participation to be real. Those are victories that are entirely, completely, exclusively yours. Your silence is not punishment. It's not a game. It's not a strategy designed to make them chase you harder. It's simply you, finally, choosing yourself. It's the most honest thing you could possibly do. Not making a show of your boundary, not announcing it or explaining it or hoping they'll understand it. Just quietly, consistently refusing to participate in a dynamic that was destroying you. And that's the one victory in this entire twisted dynamic that truly matters. Hold on to it. Protect it. Let it guide you forward into whatever comes next, knowing that you've already proven the most important thing of all, that you can save yourself, that you have the capacity, that you have the strength, that you're worth saving. Always. And that victory, that quiet triumph of finally choosing yourself, is yours forever, regardless of what happens next.